Welcome back to our panel discussion in Focus, Governance, Risk, and Compliance, sponsored by RSA and Optiv here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Jim Dalkin, Director of Financial Management Assurance at the Government Accountability Office, Jason Malmstrom, Assistant Inspector General in the Audit Division at the Justice Department, David Walter, Vice President of RSA, Archer, and Ilanko Subramaniam, GRC Practice Leader at Optiv. And in our final segment, let's wind up the discussion on governance. We talked about the need for leadership, and then the need for what leadership does to get buy-in from down, at the ranks. But let's talk about the seat at the table. I mean, who should be involved? Who's the team ultimately in an agency that is setting the risk management strategy and response? We can start with anyone. Why don't we start with an agency like Justice Department, Jason?
As the Inspector General, we look at it a bit differently. We're not necessarily at the seat at that table as the department is setting its risk management structure, its strategy. Where there's an independent check to say, you've established it, we could assess that and tell the department, we see some other areas that you may want to address. But more so, I think it's going to be in the implementation, where an Inspector General or a GAO comes in and looks at how are you implementing your strategy to push risk down into the overall culture and how a department operates, as well as how are you then going about monitoring and ensuring that that risk management structure and strategy is actually implemented as you see it. Who needs to be at the table for the department? Obviously, it needs to be assigned leadership. I think near the very top or at the very top, someone needs that responsibility. And then, of course, roles need to be defined and defined well enough to everybody understands what they own in the overall risk management strategy.
So looking at that model from the COSA with 3 lines of defense, then really GAO, Inspectors General are the audit layer, might say.
We're an external layer. I think the IG community as well as GAO as external auditor. Many organizations have internal auditors as well, and I think they may be a sort of that third line of defense. But I really think it comes down to the control environment, which is an element of internal controls. And is that control environment receptive to having those discussions about risk? Because you need very senior leadership involved. I think in federal government, there's a reluctance sometimes to talk about risk, and if senior leadership is buying into this, then that reluctance will be chipped away, and then I think you can have much more effective conversations. Now, there may also be some tools that can be used to help facilitate that, but that's the crux of getting the conversation going.
All right, so David, we talked about the idea of the inventory, and we kind of know who's at the table. You would have to have your CX suite, let's say, CXO suite, and then you would need top agency management, the secretary, deputy secretaries for management, and a lot of those are not in place yet at this particular moment, so that's kind of a risk too in that transitional period. But once you have the team, how do you enable them to be able to do effective work?
Yeah, I think it's all about a maturity journey, right, as it relates to a lot of things. So I think we're seeing in the government space kind of a maturity that's happening that maybe is a little bit behind where we see in the commercial space and highly regulated industries that require this type of stuff, such as financial services and energy and all the rest. But I think to go back to the last question for a minute, is who's at the table? I'm seeing that evolve, definitely. And I see that we always prescribe more of a committee type of approach. When you were talking about risk, we talked about silos, we talked about the tone at the top and all that. And so to get everyone at the table, I think is very instrumental to make sure that you can go on that maturity journey. And having a lot of perspectives there. That's a key element of risk management as well, is trying to get all opinions at the table. So I think it needs to be a big table, right? So we need to invest in big tables first, maybe, and then we can get all the people at the table. But then from an actual operationalizing this, I think as we talked about first, the inventory, I think knowing what's most critical and getting on paper is very important. And then we can start the assessments of the control environment and the internal control structure, and taking a risk inventory can be very important. And for me, I think a lot of the effectiveness of these programs is ensuring consistency. We've talked a little bit about taxonomy and the importance of shared taxonomy, but also from an assessments, and there's a lot of risk assessments, there's a lot of audits going on and all that. The more consistent we are in how they're done, that becomes much more valid and accurate. And so this is where things like, as Jim mentioned, technology and some tools that are out there can help make sure and ensure there is a consistent approach. We are all using the same language, and we're all involved in this and getting that conversation going, so that when we do sit around that table, we have one thing to look at that we all can ascribe to and have a good conversation from.
Ilanko, is there an app for that?
I'm sure there is. Or that somebody's writing it. So I think, just to reiterate what David said, the two major aspects that you need to focus on is, far more important than identifying the roles is the function. So we need to have the individual constituents or the business units or the agencies, whoever represented, who needs to execute on this function, needs to be on the table. Then there should be a function of audit, there should be a function of policy, right, and practices, and then there should be a function of legal, right, representation and financial representation, HR, and so on, right? So because one of the things that we fail to understand is that we think risk management is about just running the business. There are multiple other organizations partner organizations actually support that function, right? So they need to have a kind of the word on the table as well. And then the second aspect is the establishing a governance committee or a operating, enterprise risk management committee. And this committee needs to have a charter. The charter needs to clearly outline what are the objectives. Is it a advisory committee, or is it a governing committee where you can escalate things, or is the committee going to institute and direct new things or handle difficult questions? And then once you have these two main entities operational, I think that will help you to kind of direct a good risk management program.
You alluded to something I think we need to bring out a little even more explicitly, and that is contractors, cloud service providers, communications providers, and mission-related primes, and even subcontractors. There's been a lot of discussion on managing the risks that they have and compliance at the subcontractor and contractor level. And those really need to be part of this, I would think.
They are, and they're very important to a department or an agency, because ultimately it's that department, that agency, which is responsible. Because if you are outsourcing your work and something goes wrong, it may come up right through the financials or right through some sort of issue. And we're consistently telling those agencies, you can't outsource the responsibility. So you have to take that. And that it does involve wrapping some internal controls, some monitoring around the various risks that you might identify.
I mean, you really have to look at it as a partnership, even though it's a financial and contracting relationship. If you're going to have that kind of level of, I guess, mutual commitment and trust in a risk context, then you have to look at contractors as partners.
There is a financial risk aspect and an IT risk aspect, right, to leveraging third parties and how you best manage the risk that's associated with it. But it's also reputational risk at the forefront as well. It doesn't matter whether it's some other subprime doing the work. If it's your agency's name that's on it, and that's how it's going to be seen and read throughout in the press and in the world. So I think organizations are now fully aware of that because of events that have happened, right? And so they're now looking at their chief information security officers, and from a security perspective or from an operational risk perspective, how do we account for this risk, right? And making sure that the internal control environment that we set up internally is extended to the third party. And that can be done through contracts and service level agreements with our primes and our contractors, but also through a formal risk assessment process like what we would do internally, but into a contractor type of environment, and bringing those issues that come up during that process into the fold just alongside internal risk evaluations.
Because the last, I guess, really 16 years, administrations have been pushing the idea of shared services, mostly among federal agencies. And so that gets people, and it's not a new concept, but they're trying to spread it to many, many more functions or lines of business, as they used to call them. And so you've got then bloodlines mixing, where one agency might have a more mature risk management and risk mitigation and compliance process than the other. So that seems like something that government's got to look at itself and kind of get its arms around.
I think one of the challenges is when information or work is outsourced, the agency may spend a lot of time and effort, for example, in cyber, in making sure they are secure, and then they really need to do something in addition to make sure that their partners or their contractors are also secure, and sometimes that's an additional conversation that has to take place.
Well, especially with cloud today,
Yes.
it's that much more paramount, right? Because the perimeter around an organization or an agency today no longer exists because of the move to the cloud and using different devices and things like that. You can't control it. You can't touch it anymore. You can't grab a hold of it. So I know security officers are really struggling with how to best manage that type of risk in today's world.
Cloud and mobile, right? I mean, there is no clear definition of what's work and what's personal and what's, you know, this specific to this
What's
particular
shopping,
agency.
right?
Exactly, right? I mean, you know, we bring in these devices, BYODs and all that stuff into work. And on one hand, it's encouraged because that's the way of doing things and being productive. And on the other hand, we have to still worry about privacy and security and all that kind of stuff, right? So the other thing to think about is that I think it's important that you know, we do need to understand the kind of the emerging threats that are in the, you know, that are coming, brought in by third parties. It's not just vendors, it's third parties, supply chain, you know, distribution, right? Various other types of vendors that government needs to work with.
All right, so you've got this team. I'm sorry, Jason, did you want to?
I just wanted to add to this, you know, the third party, the acquisition, the contracting. From an inspector general's perspective, what we see a lot of times is there needs to be better planning and less a focus on the requirements for that contract and more about what are the expectations for the results. What's the performance we expect from the contractor, and then focus on, the departments need to focus on how do we ensure that we're actually getting the performance that is expected, not just, as we just said earlier, check the box that they satisfy this requirement or that.
All right, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to make sure we cover what happens when this team, and we've got a governance structure and a team set up for risk management and compliance, when they all gather at the table, and sometimes they physically gather at the table or maybe on teleconferencing, does everybody bring just a pad of paper to that meeting, or in their Moleskine book and a fountain pen, or is there environments available that are similar to those that you see in acquisition and cybersecurity, IT, a lot of other functions?
Traditionally, what we've seen when in speaking of less mature and risk management functions is that it's traditionally managed in Excel. Microsoft Excel is a great tool. Everyone's got it and knows it. Easy way to catalog and talk about the things that we've been discussing. I think, and so I see in a lot of organizations, everyone's bringing their Excel spreadsheets, right, and trying to correlate them. And as we talked about, risk management is bringing this information together, right, and making it actionable. And that's very difficult to do within these Excel spreadsheets and silos of information and catalogs that are all spread out throughout. So we're seeing now a move to a more proactive kind of risk management platform approach and bringing all the information into one place for your assessments and for your risk management processes to work in a more vibrant, kind of actionable and accountable environment, to bring that to the table and let everyone looking at the one thing.
And the platform obviously, as David's talking about, already provides the common notifications, the workflow, and you know, collaboration tools that traditionally has been used using emails and, you know, walking over to somebody's office to talk about things. And not to take away those things, but this is to automate and enable the functions that you already have established.
So this is something that agencies have available to them to kind of rev up to leverage, I guess, the knowledge that they bring to risk management. They have some tools to make it operate much more quickly.
Hopefully to jumpstart, right? Let's leverage some best practices and processes that are out there around continuous monitoring and assessments and authorizations, and leverage some of that pre-built in to just get that jump start that's needed to get that culture really working.
All right, well, I think we've covered a lot of territory. That brings us to the end of the discussion. I want to thank today's guests. They are Ilanko Subramaniam, GRC Practice Leader at Optiv. Jim Dalkin is Director of Financial Management Assurance at the Government Accountability Office. Jason Malmstrom, Assistant Inspector General in the Audit Division at the Justice Department. And David Walter, Vice President of RSA Archer. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com, and your search term is In Focus.